I handed over $35,000 to give my family the Alaska adventure of a lifetime, towering glaciers, whales breaking the surface, and nights under the northern lights. But at the airport, while families hugged and laughed around me, my son leaned close and whispered, "Dad, I didn't get you a ticket. Just go home." The gate agent's screen confirmed it. 4 names. Not 5. They had planned it that way all along. In that moment, I wasn't just left behind from a vacation. I was being erased from my own family. What happened next turned into a fight I never thought I'd face at my age. A fight for respect, for truth, and for my grandchildren's future. Before I tell you how it unfolded, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I'll be reading. The terminal buzzed with the sounds of departure, rolling suitcases, children dragging stuffed animals, the smell of burnt coffee from the kiosk by the gate. I stood in line at the check-in counter with my carry-on in one hand and my passport in the other. My heart beat with quiet excitement. Alaska wasn't just a destination. It was the trip my late wife, Margaret, and I had once dreamed of but never taken. My son, Daniel, had insisted he'd handle all the bookings. "Dad, you've done enough. Let me take care of the details. You just show up," he had told me. I trusted him. After all, I was the one who had wired him the $35,000 for the trip, covering flights, crews, tours, and hotels. It was meant to be my gift to the family, to Daniel, his wife Melissa, and their children, Lucas and Sophie. When the agent typed my name into her system, her professional smile faltered. She tried again, slower, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't see a reservation for you." I frowned, leaning forward as if proximity would fix the mistake. "Try again. Richard Hayes. Traveling with Daniel Hayes. It's a family booking." Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, who was already drifting toward the security line, his phone in hand. She turned her screen toward me, 4 names highlighted. Daniel. Melissa. Lucas. Sophie. 4. Not 5. My stomach dropped. The ground felt unsteady, as though I were already standing on Alaskan ice about to crack. I walked the few steps to Daniel. "They don't see my name," I said. "The booking shows 4 tickets." Daniel rubbed his forehead, his beard rasping under his palm. He didn't look surprised. That hurt more than anything. "Dad," he said, voice low, "I was going to tell you when we got there. Don't make a scene here." "A scene?" My voice trembled, not from volume but from disbelief. "Daniel, this isn't arithmetic. 4 is not 5. He shifted his backpack and adjusted his coat like he was carrying the weight of me instead of his luggage. "Look, we thought it would be too much for you. The flights, the tours. You'd get tired. It's better this way." "Better for whom?" I asked. "Go home. Get some rest," he said. "We'll call you from the hotel. The kids will FaceTime you. They'll tell you about the glaciers." FaceTime. As though pixels could replace presence. "Don't do this, son," I whispered. "Not like this." But he leaned closer, peppermint on his breath, and delivered the final blow. "Don't make me the bad guy, Dad. Just go home." The boarding lights flipped from white to red. Families clutched boarding passes and hugged each other, stepping forward with excitement. I turned back to the check-in agent. She avoided my eyes, but I asked anyway. "When was this reservation made?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. 6 weeks ago. No changes since. 6 weeks. Long after the conversations where we discussed costs and destinations. Long after I transferred the money. They had planned this. My son, my flesh and blood, had planned to erase me. I thanked the agent, and walked away under the spinning glass doors into the sharp wind outside. The air smelled of jet fuel and fresh beginnings. But for me, it carried the bitter sting of endings. The cab driver didn't ask questions. He glanced at me once in the rearview mirror, saw something he understood but didn't want to touch, and turned up the radio instead. I liked him instantly. The city rolled past, warehouses, cranes at the port, the bridge arching like tired ribs against the sky. I'd opened my wallet to pay and caught sight of the photo Margaret had slipped inside years ago, me on a sled with Lucas and Sophie bundled in scarves, cheeks red with winter joy. Their tiny hats made them look like acorns. I shut the wallet. My jaw tightened. By the time the cab pulled up to my house, I had decided one thing: this story wasn't over. The house greeted me with its familiar sigh as I unlocked the door. Margaret used to call it that, the house's way of saying, "You're home." I left my suitcase by the entryway and walked into my office. On the oak desk sat an old leather-bound journal, the one I hadn't opened since Margaret's funeral 3 years ago. Its pages smelled faintly of dust and ink. I pulled it toward me, uncapped my pen, and wrote. Day 1. Betrayal confirmed. 4 names. Not 5. $35,000. Son says better this way. I say theft wears polite shoes. I underlined it once, firm, the way an engineer marks a line on a blueprint. That journal would become my shield. If Daniel wanted to play games, I would keep records sharper than his lies. The phone buzzed. Missed calls. Dozens stacking one after another. Melissa's messages came first, her tone sliding from polite concern to sharp demand. Richard, please answer. The kids are upset. Dad, this isn't funny. Fix this. You're going to regret this, old man. That last line was Daniel. I wrote it down in the journal. Logged it like evidence. The calls kept coming, but I didn't answer. Instead, I walked the house the way I always did when my mind was unsettled, touching Margaret's reading chair, the pencil marks on the doorframe where we measured Lucas and Sophie's heights, the worn edge of my desk. I stopped at the window, looking out at the maple tree Margaret planted the year Sophie was born. Its branches stretched skyward, bare and honest. I won't let them erase me, I whispered. By the time night fell, the house was silent. But my journal page glared back at me, filled with the first entries of a story that was just beginning. I poured myself coffee, dark and bitter, and stared at the words. They had left me behind. But they had also underestimated me. This wasn't just about a trip anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and the future of 2 children who deserved warmth, not cold discipline disguised as love. And if my son thought I would go quietly, he had forgotten who raised him. The next morning, I woke to the shrill silence of a phone that had stopped ringing only because the battery had died. I set it on the counter and made coffee the way Margaret used to, slow percolator, cream stirred until the color turned barncat brown. The quiet was thick, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet before ice cracks under your feet. I sat at my desk and opened the journal again. Day 2. Betrayal wasn't an event, it was a structure, built deliberately, piece by piece, until it could stand on its own cruelty. I listed the facts like blueprints. $35,000 wired from my account to Daniel. Promise, family trip, 5 people. Reality, 4 tickets booked 6 weeks in advance. Intent, deliberate exclusion. Result, public humiliation. I drew a line under the list and wrote, if they can erase me from a trip, they can erase me from more. The phone blinked alive when I plugged it in. 56 missed calls. 30 messages. Daniel's voice rang out in one of them, sharp as an ice pick. You'll regret this. We'll make sure of it. Melissa's was softer, manipulative. Richard, the kids are crying. Please don't ruin this. But then came a voice that shook me, Lucas, my grandson, barely 10 years old. Grandpa? Did you get lost? Dad says you didn't want to come. But I know you did. I saved you a seat on the bus. I closed my eyes. Betrayal is one thing. Lying to children is another. That was the moment I understood. If I didn't act now, I would lose more than a vacation. I would lose my place in their lives. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Michael Grant, my old attorney. A man with a memory sharp enough to recall handshakes from 3 decades ago. Richard, he answered after 2 rings, his voice like worn leather. It's been a while. I assume you're not calling to talk about fishing. No, I said. I'm calling to talk about theft, betrayal, and how to build a wall paper can't burn through. Tell me everything. I did, piece by piece, as though laying out broken machinery on a workbench. By the end, he didn't sigh, didn't scold, didn't pity. He just said, "We can fix this. I'll draw up a demand for repayment of the funds." "And Richard?" "Yes?" "Keep records. Every call, every message. Treat them like evidence. Because they are." I looked at the journal already waiting in front of me. "I've started." "Good," he said. "And don't confront them directly. Let paper speak. It's heavier than anger." After the call, I wrote in the journal, "Lawyer contacted. Demand letter to follow. Do not engage emotionally." But I couldn't stop thinking about Lucas's voice. That boy had saved me a seat. He believed I was still part of his family. I picked up a postcard from the drawer, an old one Margaret had bought years ago but never mailed. A photo of a bald eagle, wings spread wide against a glacier sky. I wrote in careful block letters so Lucas could read without help. "Lucas, eagles can see fish from miles away. Remember, the sky is yours too. Love, Grandpa." I wrote another to Sophie. "Sophie, glaciers move slow, but they carve valleys stronger than mountains. Never let anyone tell you slow is weak. Love, Grandpa." I placed the postcards on the counter by the door, next to my house keys. A reminder that I wasn't erased, not yet. The phone buzzed again. A new message from Daniel. "You think you're clever? When we get back, there will be consequences." I wrote it down. Evidence. Then I closed the journal and stared at the maple tree outside. Its bare branches stretched into the winter air, strong despite the cold. If my son wanted war, he'd find out I was still an engineer at heart. And engineers don't crumble. We reinforce. We build better. We endure. The trip may have begun without me, but the real journey, mine, was just starting. The third day after the airport, the house felt smaller, as though betrayal had stolen not just my seat on the plane, but space inside my walls. The maple outside stood bare and proud, but inside, every tick of the clock echoed like an accusation. I couldn't sit idle anymore. My journal had lines, my lawyer had advice, but my son had my money, and that meant he still had power. I pulled the folder labeled Alaska Trip from my cabinet. Receipts, wire confirmation, the glossy brochure for the cruise with glaciers shining like diamonds across the cover. 5 lines on my bank transfer receipt. 4 names on his booking. Arithmetic doesn't lie. Michael, my lawyer, had sent a draft demand letter that morning. Simple, sharp, return funds by date certain. All future contact through counsel. His words were clean, stripped of adjectives, like steel beams set in concrete. I printed it twice, slid one into a folder, and tucked the other into my safe. Paper was becoming my new armor. But it wasn't enough. Engineers don't just write instructions, they build systems. Daniel had used my trust against me once. I wouldn't let him again. At the bank, the air smelled faintly of brass and ink. The clerk, a woman my age with a brooch shaped like a lighthouse, greeted me by name. That mattered, not being forgotten. "I need to adjust my accounts," I said. "New beneficiaries, new locks." She nodded unfazed, and led me into a glass-walled office. The papers spread out in front of me felt heavier than any blueprint. By the time I walked out, I'd redirected 2 accounts to the Bayfield Education Fund, a scholarship Margaret and I had once whispered about during quiet dinners. I also closed an old cushion account Daniel had access to, one I'd set up years ago when optimism outweighed caution. The clerk handed me a safe deposit key. Cold steel in my palm. "Keep this safe," she said. "I always do," I answered. Inside the vault, I placed 3 items: the original trip receipt, Margaret's voice on a small cassette tape reading bedtime stories, and the deed to the house. Proof of what mattered. Proof no one could forget. By afternoon, I'd done more with signatures and stamps than Daniel could undo with temper. That knowledge sat in me like a warm coal. But then the phone rang. This time I answered. What the hell are you doing? Daniel's voice was sharp, already boiling. Behind him, I heard chaos, airport chatter, Melissa's quick reprimand, Lucas crying. Protecting myself, I said evenly. And teaching you that theft, even dressed in family clothes, has consequences. You're punishing the kids, he snapped. No. I'm protecting them. Teaching them that warmth doesn't come from control. Melissa grabbed the phone then, her tone like sugared ice. Richard, let's not escalate. The children are confused enough. If you just signed over. Signed over what? I cut in. My dignity? My future? My grandchildren's trust? Not this time. Daniel took the phone back. When we get home, there's going to be a reckoning. I wrote that down, I said, glancing at the journal open beside me. 7 words. Empty but recorded. I hung up before he could answer. The silence afterward was thick, but it wasn't weakness. It was resolve. That night, I walked the house again, the way I always did before bed. Door jamb with pencil marks. Margaret's chair. The smooth edge of my desk. But this time, when I touched the new deadbolt I'd installed that afternoon, it clicked firm under my hand, a promise, not a threat. They had stripped me from a trip. But I was building something stronger than travel plans. I was building walls of paper, trust, and truth. And when Daniel came back, it wouldn't be me standing on trial. It would be him. The day after locking my accounts, I knew I needed one more layer of protection, proof that couldn't be twisted by Daniel's words or Melissa's rehearsed politeness. If they wanted to paint me as unstable or incapable, I'd meet them with truth on paper. Not anger. Not shouting. Evidence. That morning, I called my physician, Dr. Reynolds. He'd been my doctor for 15 years, long enough to know which of my joints creaked from age and which complaints were just a man missing his wife. The receptionist, cheerful in that way offices hire for, booked me for a same-day slot. Come in at 2, Mr. Hayes, she said. Dr. Reynolds will see you personally. I arrived early. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and fresh coffee. Sitting on the paper-covered exam table, I lined my shoes neatly on the floor, heel to heel. Margaret used to tease me about that habit, but order is how you prove to yourself you're steady. Dr. Reynolds came in, white coat crisp, eyes sharp but kind. Richard, he said, you look more worried than sick. What's going on? I told him. Not every detail, but enough. The trip. The exclusion. The threats. My fear that Daniel would twist concern into a weapon. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, pen tapping the clipboard. Then he set it down and asked me the questions that mattered. Richard, tell me the date. Tell me where we are. Who's the president? What did you have for breakfast? I answered each one clean, steady. Toast I didn't burn. Bayfield Clinic, room 3. President correct. January, almost February. He smiled faintly. Orientation intact. He checked my vitals, listened to my lungs with his stethoscope cold against my chest, then leaned back. Your blood pressure's fine. Reflexes steady. There's no sign of impairment. Would you be willing, I asked, to write a short statement? For my records. Just in case. Of course, he said without hesitation. Right there, he dictated to his assistant while I watched. Patient is oriented to person, place, time, and situation. Independent in daily living. No evidence of cognitive impairment. He signed it with his neat flourish, handed me the paper, and placed a copy in my chart. Richard, he added, lowering his voice, people sometimes confuse disagreement with confusion. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Keep this paper. It's armor. I slipped it into a hard plastic sleeve, the kind Margaret once used for important recipes. Some things deserve to be protected from spills, even the ugly kind. On the way home, I stopped at the bakery near the police station. I bought a cherry pie. Not for myself, but for the 2 officers who had knocked on my door days ago for a welfare check Daniel had triggered. They treated me like a man, not a case number. Respect deserves repayment. I dropped it off, still warm, with a note, "Thank you for doing your job without theater. Richard Hayes." Back at the house, the phone buzzed again. A message from Melissa. "The kids are asking why you're angry. Please don't do anything rash." Rash. That was her word for what Daniel was doing. Projection. I wrote it in the journal. Melissa, blame shift. Use of word rash. Minutes later, another message from Daniel. "We're meeting when I get back. Public place. You'll listen this time." I smiled despite myself. Engineers like me don't listen to threats. We listen to structures. And Daniel's was already showing cracks. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed the stack: bank changes, safe deposit records, demand letter draft, Dr. Reynolds' statement. Piece by piece, it looked less like panic and more like a bridge, something sturdy enough to carry me across whatever storm Daniel brought next. Before bed, I walked the house again. Door jamb, pencil marks. Margaret's chair. The new deadbolt, firm and final under my hand. The maple outside the window was motionless, its branches stretched like open arms. Tomorrow, I knew, would bring confrontation. But tonight, the house held me steady. And for the first time since the airport, I believed I wasn't the one on trial anymore. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Daniel texted the morning they returned. "Lunch. Main Street Diner. 12 sharp. Public place. Don't be late." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Engineers prepare for deadlines long before the clock strikes. By noon, I was seated at a corner booth with my back to the wall, a cup of black coffee in front of me, and a folder of documents resting on the seat beside me. The diner smelled of grease, onions, and survival. Regulars sat in the same seats they'd probably claimed for decades, each one wrapped in routines that didn't bend to anyone else's chaos. That steadiness comforted me. The bell over the door jingled at 12:06. Daniel walked in first, jaw tight, posture stiff as a plumb line. Melissa trailed, holding Lucas by the hand while Sophie clutched a notebook to her chest like a shield. "Grandpa!" Sophie beamed when she spotted me, racing ahead to shove her drawing into my hands. A bald eagle with a wingspan too big for the page. For Grandpa was written in block letters at the top. "It's perfect," I told her, my voice steady. "Smithsonian would be lucky to have this." She glowed, though Melissa quickly ushered her into the booth as though joy itself needed restraining. Daniel didn't sit right away. He stood at the edge of the table, staring at the folder by my side. "Dad, we're here to talk. Not, whatever this is. I'm here to listen," I said, sliding Sophie's eagle carefully into my folder. "But listening doesn't mean surrender." He exhaled through his nose, then sat. Melissa slid in beside him, smile professional, eyes sharp. "Dad," she began, "we're worried about you. The trip, your behavior, the bank changes. It's not safe." "Unsafe for whom?" I asked. "For you," Daniel cut in. "And frankly, for the kids. We've spoken with a consultant. Elder Law. He says the best path forward is a springing power of attorney. Simple paperwork. It protects you in case you get confused." Melissa pulled a packet from her bag and set it on the table. Tabs, signatures marked with neat little XS, as though I need help finding my way. I took a slow sip of coffee. "You prepared this before or after you erased me from Alaska?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't start." "I already have," I said. "And my attorney advises me not to sign anything over lunch." His eyes flicked to Melissa, then back at me. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Sophie shifted in her seat, looking between us. Lucas fidgeted with a rubber band around his wrist, snapping it once, twice. My stomach sank. That wasn't a toy. That was a scar waiting to be made. Melissa reached for my hand, tone soft but rehearsed. "Richard, the house is too big. You're alone. This is just simplification. For everyone's peace of mind." I withdrew my hand slowly, placing it on the folder instead. Peace doesn't come from control. It comes from warmth. And you're mistaking one for the other. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. If you won't cooperate, we'll have to escalate. Court. Guardianship. Don't make us go that route. Guardianship? Sophie whispered, eyes wide. What's that? Melissa hushed her quickly, but the word hung in the air like smoke. I opened the folder, laid Dr. Reynolds's letter on the table, and tapped it once with my finger. Independent. Oriented. No cognitive impairment. Signed yesterday by a doctor who knows me better than you know yourselves. Daniel barely glanced at it. We have a letter too. He pulled out a sheet stamped with the logo of a telemedicine clinic. Words like confusion and impaired judgment dotted the page. It was thin paper, thin ink, thin truth. The waitress arrived then, balancing plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. She set them down without looking at us, sensing the weather in the booth. When she left, silence settled heavier than steam. Dad, Daniel said finally, his voice colder than the pie case at the counter. You've embarrassed yourself enough. This ends one way, you either give us control or we take it. I slid his flimsy letter aside and looked him dead in the eye. You've already taken enough. At that moment, a man in a windbreaker walked into the diner. He carried a stiff envelope, his expression professional, almost apologetic. Richard Hayes? He asked. Yes. He set the envelope on the table. You've been served. The words cut sharper than Daniel's threats ever could. Guardianship. Filed by my own son. Melissa avoided my eyes. Sophie shrank against her seat. Lucas snapped the rubber band again, harder this time. I placed the envelope gently beside Dr. Reynolds's letter. One flimsy, one heavy. One lie, one truth. Lunch is over, I said, rising. The next conversation we have will be on paper. In court. Where truth carries weight. Daniel started to protest, but I was already walking out. Sophie's eagle drawing pressed firm inside my folder, reminding me why I had to keep fighting. Outside the cold bit hard, but it was honest. And for the first time, I knew the battle wasn't about me anymore. It was about making sure 2 children never grew up mistaking cruelty for discipline. ChatGPT said. The night after being served, I sat at my desk with the envelope spread open like a blueprint of betrayal. The petition was worse than I expected. Words designed to bruise lined the pages: impulsive decisions, financial recklessness, increasing confusion, unsafe for grandchildren. But it was the last line that nearly stopped my breath: limited contact with minors until capacity is determined. They weren't just cutting me out of finances. They were circling the kids, building a fence around Lucas and Sophie, and locking me outside. I wrote it down in the journal, every phrase, every accusation. Then I called Michael. Read the first page aloud, he instructed. I did. He didn't sigh. He didn't curse. He simply said, Good. That last clause? That's the tell. They know your love for the kids is your leverage, so they're trying to weaponize it. What do we do? I asked. We fight it with paper. We'll file a response, a motion to deny the guardianship outright. We'll also request temporary protective orders, no corporal punishment, no removal of the kids from the county without notice, and no disparagement in front of them. Bright lines judges like. Will it work? It depends on the judge. But you've done your homework. Dr. Reynolds's letter, the bank records, your journal, the voicemail threats, all of it paints a picture of competence. Judges respect order. And Richard? You've got order in spades. By morning, my dining table looked like a drafting board. Tabs, folders, and binders labeled in block letters: house, health, money, kids, court. Engineers know that structures don't hold if you skip the foundations. At the bank, I placed Dr. Reynolds's original letter in the safe deposit box. Copies stayed in my folder, one already scanned and sent to Michael. On the way out, I picked up a stack of certified mail envelopes. Nothing speaks louder than stamped proof. The phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel. Sign the POA and this all goes away. Last chance. I forwarded it to Michael. He replied within minutes, good. That's coercion. Keep it. Judges hate bullies. That afternoon, the officers showed up again. The same pair as before, but this time they stood easier in my doorway. Mr. Hayes, the woman said. We had another call requesting a welfare check? Family concern. Of course, I said, stepping aside. Come in. You know the drill. They glanced around the house. Books stacked neatly, coffee fresh, a legal pad on the desk titled Court Prep, January. The young officer smiled faintly. My grandmother used to write lists like that, he said. Kept her sharper than any computer. Lists keep the wolves in the right forest, I said. The woman officer nodded. You seem fine, Mr. Hayes. We'll note it. Before you go, I said, sliding a foil-covered tin from the counter. Cherry pie. No strings attached. They laughed, thanked me, and left. Their presence had been meant as intimidation. Instead, it turned into a neighborly exchange. Another piece of evidence, calm, cooperative, capable. That night, I sat with Lucas's postcard in my hands. The eagle he'd drawn stared back at me, wings outstretched. Saved you a seat, he'd said. In 2 weeks, a judge would decide whether that seat remained mine. But I wasn't walking into that courtroom empty. I had proof, I had allies, and I had purpose. I placed the postcard in the binder labeled Kids. Then I wrote across the journal page in firm block letters. Day 6, we fight with rails, not rage. Bright lines. No cruelty disguised as love. When I closed the journal, the house sighed with me. The war wasn't won. But the foundation was set. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and tension. Men straightened their ties, women hushed children, and lawyers carried briefcases heavy enough to anchor ships. I stood in the hallway with my binder tucked under my arm, the tabs bright and orderly. House. Health. Money. Kids. Court. Michael joined me, calm as ever, his tie neat, his voice steady. Remember, Richard, speak plainly. You don't have to win a performance. Just tell the truth. Judges like truth that sounds like it can hold a roof. When we entered Department 204, the judge was already on the bench, a woman with reading glasses on a chain, her expression that of someone who'd heard every excuse a man could invent. She glanced at the docket. Case of Hayes guardianship petition. Appearances? Opposing counsel, crisp in a navy suit, stood first. Your Honor, we represent Daniel Hayes, the petitioner. We seek a temporary guardianship over his father, Richard Hayes, due to concerning behavior, impulsive financial decisions, erratic cancellations, and cognitive decline. Then Michael rose. Your Honor, I represent Richard Hayes, who stands competent, oriented, and independent. We seek dismissal of this petition and request protective orders ensuring the welfare of his grandchildren. The judge looked at me directly. Mr. Hayes, would you step forward? My knees felt their age, but they obeyed. Binder in hand, I moved to the witness stand. The oath was routine, but the words, tell the truth, the whole truth, landed heavy. Opposing counsel began, voice sharp and rehearsed. Mr. Hayes, did you cancel a family trip without telling anyone? I kept my eyes on the judge. I canceled the reservation I paid for that listed 4 names instead of 5. My money. Their deceit. That's arithmetic, not confusion. The lawyer pressed. Have you isolated yourself recently? Avoided family contact? I've had lunch with my family, shared pie with local officers, visited my physician, and walked my neighborhood every evening. If that's isolation, then I've been surrounded. The courtroom murmured faintly. The judge lifted her palm. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. That's enough for now. Michael stood, sliding a document across to the clerk. Your Honor, we submit Dr. Reynolds's evaluation, dated last week. It confirms my client is oriented to person, place, time, and situation, independent in daily living, and without cognitive impairment. The judge scanned the letter, nodded slightly, then held up the flimsy telemedicine note Daniel had filed. Convenience clinic? Online? This holds little weight without an exam. She set it aside like a napkin. Next came witnesses. Ms. Alvarez, the school counselor, stepped forward, her voice calm but steady. I observed Lucas with a rubber band mark on his wrist. I noted flinching when hands were raised. I filed a mandated report. The judge thanked her, then called the two officers. They spoke plainly. We conducted multiple welfare checks. House orderly. Mr. Hayes cooperative. No cause for concern. The air shifted. Evidence stacked on my side like beams in a bridge. Finally, the judge leaned back. I am denying the temporary guardianship. Full stop. I am, however, granting the respondent's proposed protective orders, no corporal punishment, no removal of the children from the county without 72 hours' notice, and no disparagement in front of them. Daniel stiffened, his jaw flexing. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, turning to my son, you may think you're protecting your father. But what I see is pressure. Pressure makes people foolish. Stop grabbing levers. Start using doors. The gavel didn't bang, she simply signed with her pen. But the sound of it scratching across paper was louder than any slam. When I walked out into the hallway, Michael clapped me on the shoulder. You didn't just survive, Richard. You held the line. I exhaled for the first time all day. In my binder, Sophie's eagle drawing sat beside Dr. Reynolds's letter. One proof of innocence from a doctor. Another proof of purpose from a child. This wasn't victory. It was rails on a dangerous road. But rails keep cars from tumbling. And for now, that was enough. Spring crept into the yard with quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't announce itself but proves its presence in green shoots and birdsong. My house felt different now, not lighter, not heavier, but steadier. The rails were in place, no corporal punishment, no surprise trips, no whispering poison in front of the kids. A judge's ink had turned my son's attempts at control into boundaries he could no longer twist. The first Saturday after the ruling, Sophie and Lucas burst through my front door like the house itself was waiting to be claimed. Sophie wore a tape measure around her neck and demanded we chart her wingspan. Lucas carried a coil of rope, already practicing knots he wanted me to test. Their laughter spilled into every room like warm air after a long winter. The parenting monitor had shown up again, clipboard in hand, but this time her notes were barely touched. She watched Sophie spill cocoa without shame, Lucas tie a knot without fear, and me teaching without interruption. When Daniel appeared on the porch, stiff and unsmiling, I kept the door open but made the rules clear. Door stays open. Kids finish cocoa. Then the park. For the first time, my son swallowed his need to dictate and nodded. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first compromise that didn't taste bitter. Weeks later, in the same courthouse where he tried to erase me, Daniel's lawyer stood and withdrew the guardianship petition with prejudice. The words landed like the last nail in a coffin. This battle was over. Not because I won, but because the law reminded him where the lines were. With my binder closed and the rails still holding, I did something Susan and I had promised we'd do one day. I went to the Bayfield Children's Education Fund. In a plain classroom, I signed papers for the Warm House Scholarship in her name. Small, renewable grants for first-generation students who cared for siblings and still showed up on time. On the line that asked for intended purpose, I wrote, to help children feel warmth where others only admire straight lines. I also left a tote bag labeled socks and sand timers, for Ms. Alvarez to quietly use when a child needed warmth faster than bureaucracy could deliver it. Life became practical again. Dr. Reynolds's letter went into the safe deposit box. The trust revisions were signed and witnessed. Cocoa Saturdays were marked on the calendar like sacred holidays. Sophie filled notebooks with bird diagrams. Lucas built feeders shaped like barns. Even Daniel changed, slowly. One night he texted, "I'm not using rubber bands anymore." My reply was simple, "Good. Use words." One Sunday, he knocked without anger. Hands in pockets, voice low, he admitted, I shouldn't have gone to war because you drew a line. You stopped, I said. That matters. He didn't ask for his key back, and I didn't offer. The rails were still there, but the door stood open the width of a sensible heart. That evening, with Sophie measuring string against the doorframe and Lucas tying fisherman's bends in the kitchen, I realized something. This story was never about Alaska, or $35,000, or even betrayal. It was about building a firebreak, raw, ugly, necessary, so the flames of control couldn't consume the warmth still left. Storms don't cleanse. They reveal. And after the wreckage, you pick up what matters, plant grass over the firebreak, and let children run there without knowing why the line is so straight. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. Drop a comment below, even one word, maybe just where you're watching from. Sometimes that's enough to say you were here.